Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Calrev's, the chest of the best. The adventurer's best friend, where you can get everything you want for just your top half off. And tonight, we are talking shop. That's right. I told you guys I was going to be doing this a while ago. Longtime viewers should know that I was planning on doing this. I say this like it's been in the works for a long time. It's not. It's just been something I've been meaning to do after a month of deliberating and thinking about it. So the idea of doing a podcast has kind of sort of been somewhere at the back of my mind, but never really had an idea what to talk about. But as you can see, that's recently changed, and I have most certainly found something to talk about. So, what is this? The podcast style stream. Not much else to say about it. Basically, I just decided to do it because I talk about the Magnus archives a lot, which I will get into shortly. But I jumped on that train for the Magnus archives when I was basically almost done. I just geeked out over it with the person who recommended it. But recently, about 3 months ago, the Magnus Protocol started airing just this past year, and since I thought it'd be neat and fun to just start, overanalyzing it and everything about it as the series progresses, I figured, hey, why not just do that here? So obviously, this is a different format. I might respond to chat, I might not. I'm just kind of doing what I do best, which is throw myself into a project and perhaps do the bare minimum of production necessary. These will be more or less exclusive to Twitch, though, regarding streams. But the VODs will be available on YouTube. Will I migrate them over to some other place, some other platform? Maybe, maybe not. But, I don't know, it'll give me something to put out for sure once I go on hiatus in August. Well, it might happen earlier just because my contract is weird like that. And the same could be said about my internet. But yes, I'm basically planning on using this as a means of talking about, overanalyzing, and just sort of following along with the Magnus Protocol. I am so excited, and I can see that there are folks out there who are also excited for the lore, the deep lore regarding Magnus Archives, the Magnus Protocol. And I'm just... I've been sitting at my desk at work, right, catching up to the episodes, because it started airing in January, but I'd been putting it off just because I'm just bad at jumping onto things and listening to them or watching them as they come out. It's the same with anime, it's the same with TV shows, it's almost the same with books. No, I think books are fine on that front, but anime, TV shows, definitely. I just sort of put it off until the season ends, and then I forget about it until years later when everyone has just straight up spoiled it for me, as you do. But that's the situation. Now that it's airing and I get to see it happen as it progresses and I get to experience it as it progresses, it's I don't know. I've been more inclined to just sort of sit down, think about it, and try to analyze every little tidbit, every little snippet of detail, and try to determine if there is meaning there. And who knows, maybe a part of me kind of hopes that the analysis process may actually help me engineer my own sort of long form content with my lore and whatnot. But that's for another time, another situation. So yeah, talking shop, just gonna basically be used to talk about Magnus Protocol. Now, what'll I do when Magnus Protocol ends? I don't know. Maybe I could start using this to analyze other media, other horror stories / podcasts, etc., or just find something else to use it for. Who knows? I was very, very tempted to label this something else, because I usually use talking shop to refer to my just chatting streams, right? And I was reluctant to give that up, but I decided to just go ahead and relegate it to podcast title. podcast name, and just relegate chatting with the chest for just chatting. Which, honestly, maybe I should have done that in the first place. Who can say? Doesn't really matter. Point is, when it comes to the Magnus Protocol, I'm going to be talking about it a lot. But I'll cross the bridge of what to do when it ends when I get to it. Eventually, I'll probably have to consider it because there's like 3 seasons of the Magnus Protocol planned. And obviously, they're going to take breaks in between those seasons, so I'll definitely have to find something to talk about between those seasons. Again, something for me to worry about when I get to that point. I hope the audio is okay. Seems to be fine for the most part. Let me just up that just a little bit. All right. But anyways, for now, we're just gonna focus on my hyperfixation on the Magnus Archives. Now, what is the Magnus Archives? I've talked about this a lot. Oh, the audio's good? Perfect. Wonderful. Glad to hear it. If there are any issues that pop up, do let me know, because this isn't exactly like a whole production thing here. It's just me, after all. But we're gonna have fun. So, most people on my channel, in my community, know that I am absolutely obsessed with the Magnus Archives, but I feel like I never really explain what it is or go into true detail. For good reason, I would think, just because it is a very involved explanation. But to make it simple, the Magnus Archives is a horror fiction podcast produced by Rusty Quill, a British entertainment company and podcast network with a focus mainly on scripted fiction and tabletop RPG. It's written and performed by Jonathan Sims, Johnny, who I will be referring to from this point forward as Johnny. When referring to the writer. You'll see why. The podcast premise starts out simple enough. Johnny plays Jonathan Sims, John, from here on out, newly appointed head archivist of the Magnus Institute, an independent academic organization based in London that dedicates itself to the study, research, and preservation of paranormal knowledge. Now, the Institute's work revolves around people who have experienced supernatural events, coming into the Institute, making a statement before having its staff members go out, investigate, bring back findings, and record them. John's work as head archivist revolves around recording these statements and reviewing them after all follow-up has been completed, and then organizing the archives appropriately. Which, in universe, is not very easy. John is a skeptic looking at every statement with an unkind degree of doubt, but as time goes on, things get weird. And he realizes that there's a pattern, there's a thread of disturbing themes that seems to connect statements to each other. Now, while the statements are self-contained 15-minute anecdotes of chilling fear by themselves, the world of the Magnus Archives gradually opens up to reveal an intricate web of horror, chronicling a world at the mercy of something it always feels, but which only the unlucky witness, and the even more unfortunate survive to retell. The series began in 2016 and concluded in 2021, wrapping up its story with 200 episodes spanning 5 seasons. And I absolutely love that series to death. Anyone that has been on my streams would probably die if they took a shot for every time I mentioned Magnus Archives. I recently was introduced to it, I want to say back in 2020, I believe was when I was first introduced to it by a coworker / friend. And the way they pitched it to me was a librarian who basically gets paranoid about the freaky stuff happening in the world and starts to think that his coworkers are conspiring to kill him. Whether that's what happens or not, I will not say. Point is, I absolutely love it. Sorry, hey, give me a second. Excuse me. But yes, I absolutely adore the series. I love the series. It has formed a lot of my... It has served as wonderful inspiration for a number of tabletop RPG one-shots that I have just in my backlog. And it serves as like the foundation for one of my campaigns that I actually play with my friends. Thankfully, none of them are familiar with it, which is kind of a shame because it's a really good series. But obviously, if it wasn't, I wouldn't be talking about it. But I just love it. It's also served as a good like inspiration, I guess, for a lot of my writing, specifically those that take on more darker themes and the like. It is wonderful. But we're not talking about the Magnus Archives. If you look at the title, we're not talking about the Magnus Archives. We are talking about the Magnus Protocol. What is the Magnus Protocol? It's much the same, but different. The Magnus Institute, in this world of the Magnus Protocol, the Magnus Institute was based out in Manchester, England, and it burned down in 1999. No academic archival here. Instead, we follow the events surrounding civil service workers. Ooh. We follow civil service workers of a struggling government division known as the Office of Incident Assessment and Response, or OIAR for short. 3 seasons, as I mentioned, were planned, considered to be, quote, additional seasons within the universe of the Magnus Archives, end quote, with episodes of at least 20 minutes in length. The first 2 episodes aired finally on January 18th of this year, 2024. So, yeah, I'm going to be talking about the Magnus Protocol now that it is just a recent thing going on. I'm excited. I've been super excited for it ever since it was first announced back in 2023, I think, was when it was first announced. I might be wrong, but ooh, man, I've been on the edge of my seat at work listening to the episodes. I will say this, at the point of recording, at the point of streaming, 10 episodes have already been aired. Thankfully, they went on a short hiatus and they will be continuing in April 11th, but it's great because it allowed me to catch up and it'll give me enough time to talk about the episodes every single day until the hiatus ends. But yes, if it seems like I'm an English teacher that's sitting here and just talking about things and ominously foreshadowing stuff, it's because I have already caught up to the entire series, but I have little bits and pieces and a lot of analysis that I noted as I went along. So, for the most part, nothing should be spoiled as I continue forward. But hey, if you got something that you think will happen, by all means, you're more than welcome to say so, whether in chat or in the Discord. Either way, I highly recommend that you guys go and listen. All right? I highly recommend you go ahead and listen to the Magnus Archives. The first few episodes I will be referencing. The first series. I will try to avoid significant spoilers, but I highly, highly recommend listening to it for yourself. Because as the series progresses, who knows, might be less reason for me to do so, but at this point, there's no real way for me to know that for sure. And I'm fairly convinced, I'm very, very positive that I'm going to be making references to the first series until it gets to a point where it's not necessary. And I don't think that's going to be happening in the first season. Maybe in the second season, possibly in the third. But when the early episodes seem to be so heavily dependent on you knowing the Magnus Archives, it might be good to go ahead and give that a listen. And of course, go listen to the Magnus Protocol, especially if you're a fan of horror. There are bonus and supplementary materials available on Rusty Quill's Patreon, but you can literally listen to them free without ads wherever you listen to podcasts. I use YouTube and some generic app I found on Google Play Store called Podcast Player. You really don't have to worry about fun. I have heard that using Spotify results in it being like weirdly ordered, and that it, at least, so my brother, I recommended this series ages ago, but he got spoiled because for some reason Spotify gave him the episodes out of order. So you can listen to it free wherever you get your podcast, but I will go ahead and just say maybe don't use Spotify, just in case. But again, there's only 10 episodes, so you don't have to worry too much about spoiling yourself. But yes, please listen to it. I will be summarizing each episode and analyzing it piece by piece, but you will be missing out on the fantastic mood, the atmosphere, the sound design, and of course the voice acting. So please, I highly recommend it. Go listen to it. But yeah, with that having been said, we're just gonna go ahead and jump straight into the first episode of the Magnus Protocol, titled First Shift. The first episode, basically, in the first scene, it opens up with a computer whirring to life and listening in on an unenthusiastic work party celebrating the departure of one Teddy, last name not given, from the office, and the arrival of newcomer Sam. Immediately introduces us to the main cast and the general relationships that they have with each other. We have Alice, who is something of a gadfly within the office, very jokester type of person. We have Teddy, who is leaving. Hard to say whether or not at this point whether he'll return, but I have reason to believe he might. I'll explain later. And we have Lena, Gwen, and Colin. Colin being the IT manager of the office. And we just get a chance to see how they interact with each other. Alice cracking jokes, Teddy cracking jokes back at her, Colin demonstrating a very calm temperament, but there's just this sneaking suspicion he doesn't like his workplace. Lena appears to be the head of the office, and not exactly the fun kind of head of office either. The kind that doesn't yell at you, right, as a subordinate, but definitely will pick on the smallest hint of disrespect that you have shown, especially in front of the newcomers. But as the party progresses and some of the conversations break out between the individuals, it comes to Lena's attention that Teddy forgot to turn off their workstation, and Teddy turns to presumably the computer that has turned on in the first place and is recording this conversation, and rather surprised and very put off, goes to turn it off, despite expressing the fact that he thought he had turned it off already. Something of a red flag. But we'll get to that as we get along. The second scene opens up with the computer booting up again, but this time it's under some time seems to have passed. Alice is explaining the job to young Sam, the newcomer to the office, and we get a glimpse at what exactly the setting for Magnus Protocol is. Once again, it takes place at the Office of Incident Assessment and Response. It's a government job. They're civil service workers, but from the sounds of it, things aren't exactly the best shape that they could be. It is confirmed that the way it is set up in story, it takes place in the year of our Lord 2024, but they're stuck working with just the very old stuff. You hear the sounds of dial-up, you hear whirring sounds coming up, and in fact, as Alice explains the job to Sam, it turns out that they are working with Windows NT 4.0, the, quote, business-focused predecessor to Windows 95, end quote. Nice to know that everywhere you go, the government refuses to support its workers. Wouldn't be the first time they're working with outdated equipment, but that's besides the point. Alice explains to Sam that their work revolves around using a program in their system known as FR3-D1, which Alice has taken to calling Freddy. Because why not? You need to lighten up the mood, especially in a workplace like that. It's a program from the mid-90s that no one knows how it works. And the way it works is that, quote, it searches online databases, newspapers, forums, or whatever for incidents, flags them, then passes them through to us for assessment. Yikes. Sam hesitates to continue reading the email that's presented as a case file, and Alice lets him know that they're all of the same nature. The nature being something kinda sort of creepy, weird, and the only indication that we get that the file that Sam has read is that it mentions the word dolls a lot, which may not ring a lot of alarm bells for you if you're not familiar, but it certainly rang a lot of alarm bells for me. Now, the process of taking these incidents revolves around them taking them, reading through them completely, and then pulling out the binder. They look for whatever's mentioned most in the case, and then they basically put it into the system. So for example, dolls, Sam references the dolls, and they look around a little more throughout the file, and they come upon dolls watching or dolls human skin. A lot of options, it seems. However, the system requires them to only pick one subcategory and then cross-reference it for whatever number appears on this huge table that we don't see. I don't know if those who are patrons get access to materials that show exactly what the binder looks like and what its contents and the tables look like, but it sounds complicated. But the way Alice describes it, quote, after each entry there's 4 numbers. Dolls watching is 1157, then you cross-reference with a table here, that would be 2-C, and then you type that into the box here, along with the date of incident if there is one, and today's date, which gives us CAT 2RC 1157-2022-0901-2024. And then submit. Sounds complicated, right? It definitely is, which is another reason I'm concerned, but we'll get more to that as we go along. Alice admits that she has no idea where the information goes, and she assumes that it goes to a, quote, long-dead database that no one will ever look at or care about. X to doubt, but we'll just leave that alone. I'm fairly certain that will come into play later. It's only at that point, as Sam is about to do his, I guess, first or second case, that Freddy starts reading out one of the entries. And it's at that point Alice explains that about a year ago, Freddy would occasionally convert incidents from text to speech, usually like 1 out of 20 cases, and wouldn't let people, any of the civil service workers of the office, move on to the next one until the dictation finishes. There's no stopping it once it starts, too, apparently. No one knows why this came about or how, but they just kind of sort of let it happen. They call them talkers. And Alice has 3 voices notes that there are 3 voices and has named them. You have Norris, Chester, and Augustus, with Norris and Chester apparently being the more common voices to come out. It's at this point that they let the incident be dictated, essentially. At this point, it was being dictated by... Who was it being dictated by? Norris. I believe it was being dictated by Norris at this point in time. Or was it Chester? Shoot. Yeah, it was Norris. And the incident, fairly simple. It is an email from one Harriet Winstead to Darla Winstead. Harriet describes an incident where someone calls her and asks to meet at a local graveyard. From the context, it seems that Harriet wants to connect to quote-unquote Arthur and was looking around for psychics or the like to help make that a reality. They go to the graveyard, where they encounter a figure that wasn't quite right, though they couldn't see the figure completely. They called out, asking if it was Arthur, which the figure, with Arthur's voice, replied, "Some of him," before laughing grimly in gasps and wheezes so hard that apparently its bones snapped. Harriet ran and has been unable to leave the house ever since. She begs for her friend to come and get her because she's scared of whatever she thinks is left of Arthur. And once that dictation wraps up, we return from there to the third scene where Alice returns from having left Sam to listen to the report and lets him know that that is in fact how they're all like. Sam starts trying to score it, starts by looking up zombies, and then Gwen interjects to suggest that it's not zombies. Alice reveals that Gwen has a huge backlog, but Gwen insists that Sam would get a misfile, which Alice refutes has never happened to anyone. But moving forward, Gwen suggests reanimation as a cross-reference. Partial, cross-linked with regret, but offers that amalgamative subsection semi is also possible. It really goes to show how dense, right, the binder is. How thorough they can be expected to be when assessing these incidents. But the problem is there's just a lot there. In fact, Alice insists that zombies would have been fine, but Gwen says that aside from the misfile, there's like 3 pages of subclasses for zombies, and that it'd take them forever. It really kind of sort of demonstrates her dedication to the accuracy and attributes that as the reason for her backlog. It's at that point that Gwen is called over into Lena's office, head of the OIAR. She tells Sam not to let Alice teach her any bad habits before leaving. And then, scene changes again. However, sorry, phone went off. Should probably put that on silent. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Now, here's where a little more of like the red flags start to go off, right? The next scene, there's a slight change in the audio filter. And the way that the audio comes out is like slightly muffled. It's echoey, kind of sort of like probably as a reference to the room, but it's slightly muffled. And the thing is, you can also ever so slightly hear the sounds of like, as if it's being spoken through like an intercom, right? It's Lena's office, and Gwen, it seems, is being berated by Lena for having the backlog, but also for quote-unquote disrespecting Lena at Teddy's leaving party in front of Sam, the new hire. It's at this point that we start to see that there is some conflict between Lena and Gwen, with Gwen, despite having a no-nonsense attitude, apparently it extends to the way that the office is being run. And when Lena suggests that maybe Gwen could leave the office, she doesn't have to stay, Gwen reveals that what she wants is at the office, and what she wants is Lena's job. This doesn't shake Lena, though, and she very pointedly tells Gwen she doesn't think that Gwen has the stomach for the role of director of the office. And she says, very coldly, very matter-of-factly, quote, "I really do fear your ambition is misplaced here." The next scene takes place at the office, basically Colin, the IT manager's office. Again, a new audio filter is on, but this time you can hear ever so faintly the sounds of a camera whirring in and whirring out. Very concerning. Sam apparently asks Colin about, quote, the app, and then Colin just explodes. Just absolutely lays into Sam, yells at him, tells him, "Oh, so you're gonna be a smart ass," and things such as that. Before Sam backs off and says that Alice, the jokester, told him to say such a thing as a way to break the ice. Colin calms down and reveals that he's been trying to figure out the system for 2 years. At some point, he thought maybe this program for Freddy was written with a German source code, so he learned German, but no dice. And he's just been hammering away, maybe figuratively, possibly literally, trying to figure out why the program doesn't work. And for those of y'all who may or may not be in the hobby of streaming, perhaps you've had a moment where OBS simply did not behave. And I gotta tell you, Colin, I completely understand and I empathize with you, man. Good on you. I wish that it would be as simple as just updating or not updating. Though, funnily enough, he does say that he can't let the system update because if it were to update, with Windows NT, whatever it was called, the entire office would basically brick itself. So, hey, good on ya. Though one has to wonder what you do then. But moving on. It's at this point Sam is inputting data with Gwen. In the next scene, sorry. And then Gwen reveals that Alice is the only one Colin really gets along with. Gwen also suggests that Lena usually hires hopeless wasters. And it leads her to ask what brought Sam there. For what reason is Sam at the Office of Incident Assessment and Response? Specifically, she says that there must have been some awful, terrible thing that landed him at that job. That it's what it usually is the case when it comes to new employees. Sam says he's just trying to get back on his feet, and counters by asking Gwen what her reason is. Gwen, naturally, doesn't say what her reason is and says it's none of his business. Which, hey, kind of not fair, Gwen, but it's at that point that Freddy starts dictating a new case. This time with a different voice, Chester. And this time it is a forum blog. It starts dictating forums.lostcity.urbex.com with a specific forum dedicated to spelunking specific sites. In this case, the Magnus Institute Ruins. By Red Canary on Sunday, April 10th, 2022, 3:31 p.m. The OP, Red Canary, wonders about an abandoned building called the Magnus Institute, apparently located in the area of Manchester in the UK, over 100 miles northwest of Chelsea, London. Apparently, in this little forum, what appears to be a urban exploration organization, it's been marked as cleared, but for some reason there's no information or pictures to accompany it. And it seems everyone in the forum is just as confused as the OP. No one seems to have been there, and people assume it's a mistake and is actually unexplored. Red Canary writes and says that they've decided to check it out on April 11th, 2022. On the 20th, they report back that the site was definitely not cleared. They thought it was weird, and they promised to give a full report on the 21st. Keep in mind that this is the 20th. April 22nd comes. There's been no follow-up. But when someone points that out, Red Canary finally replies and says that the pictures aren't uploading. They've also mentioned that they haven't been feeling well and been feeling weirdly paranoid. They say that this is usually what happens to them whenever they go spelunking in the first place. But they say that the site doesn't look like it's been touched since the fire from 20 years ago. The structure is mostly intact, despite that, and they mention the Victorian style of the architecture giving way to cells, like jail cells. They're not finding any paper, not even paper mulch, and they find some remains of a library or archive in the first basement layer. They also find old graffiti too, but not tags or spooky stuff. More like symbols and suspicious stains on some floors. Occult stuff that they felt was, quote, legit in a way most of it usually isn't. April 23rd rolls around and Red Canary's photos apparently seem to be properly gone. They found an old wooden thing with a bunch of similar symbols on it, and they tried to get a picture of it, but, quote, something up with my phone camera, which further exacerbated their paranoia. At that point, they consider using a single lens camera instead of using a digital one. So they're gonna go and check with their father to get that checked, to give that a try. During this post that they made on April 23rd, they get called out by a moderator for potentially stealing from the ruins, at which point Red Canary responds aggressively, says that they would like an end to the anonymous DMs calling them a thief and threatening them, telling the moderator to call off the dogs, but the mod explains that the forum doesn't even allow for anonymous DMs. April 29th, the forum apparently is still waiting on the pics. April 30th rolls around at 2 a.m., and Red Canary uploads an image finally, captioned, "Canaries should stay above ground." Apparently, the images that they uploaded were removed by a mod for explicit imagery or gore, but not before being reacted to by the others, with responses such as, quote, "gross," and, quote, "are those eyes? Are you all right?" Without any further explanation, it ends with the moderator banning Red Canary, and on May 9th, when people express worry for Red Canary, the thread gets locked. And we are brought back to the office. Sam is shaken by the incident report when Gwen tells Sam that he needs to have a stronger stomach for this kind of stuff, but Sam asks Gwen if she's ever heard of the Magnus Institute. She hasn't. Sam muses that he's just feeling a bit of nostalgia, that it's just a bit of a blast from the past is all. At this point, Alice joins them and notes that maybe Sam should take a break, but Sam insists on pushing on, and they continue to work on through their shift into the morning. The next scene, it's Alice and Sam going out for drinks after work. They work nights, though, so for them, going out for a drink is going out for breakfast, more or less. At that point, Sam thanks Alice for the job, saying it's something to focus on and that he really needs it, revealing that the two of them are actually exes. Amicable exes, in fact. Sam asks Alice if she thinks the cases are real, and Alice hesitates, but answers, admitting that she just tries to distance herself by thinking of the incidents as words on a screen. That's it. No one knows what the OIR even is or what it really does, but she likes to pretend that the department must have been established in the 70s while everyone was, quote, high as fuck on LSD, and the government just forgot to shut it down. In the end, she just suggests that Sam not dwell on it and just take the paycheck, take the pension, and just enjoy slaving away for the government, I guess. And that ends that scene. But the final scene of the episode, is in the office when the PC starts up once again, and there's the sound of rustling, there's the sound of footsteps, and then you hear Colin, the IT manager, talking to someone. He proclaims that he knows that they're listening to all of them, and he swears he'll find them. But the audio cuts out just as he turns the computer off. And that's the first episode. It's a lot. I know. It's a lot. Makes sense. It is the first episode. So, of course, it would be a little dense. But one thing that I really liked about it is that it establishes a lot of rules, and it establishes a lot of changes to rules that are different from the Magnus Archives. So one thing I didn't mention about the Magnus Archives is that it's told entirely from John's point of view. And John's point of view is dependent on the fact that he has to record the statements on tape recorders, essentially. Because for some reason, whenever he tries to record the statements digitally, whenever he tries to put them into a digital archive, things get weird. It doesn't work. Something messes up the system. Something about the statements doesn't get recorded correctly. There's something that goes wrong, essentially. The only thing that works is written statements and magnetic tape/tape recorders. That's the only thing that works. However, in this case, with regards to the Magnus Protocol, they're shaking things up. Everything is going through digitally, right? Everything is being recorded digitally. The PCs are booting up on their own. The cameras are being tapped into. The intercoms are being tapped into. When Alice and Sam are out in the pub getting breakfast, I guess, their phones are being tapped, right? The system, Freddy, is tapping into every piece of, well, we don't know if it's Freddy, right? We don't know if it's Freddy, but like, what else could it be? Because it's accessing internet forums, it's accessing private emails, and it's pulling all this stuff and having its employees analyze it, or not analyze it, but assess it and put it into a system for who knows what purpose. So logically, it stands to reason that it would be Freddy that is listening in on this. But the question is why? And a question that we're not going to get the answer to in the first episode, for sure, but we can start thinking about it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Why don't we go ahead and like look at the characters that we are dealing with and the characters that we're working with. Sam. Samama Khalid, I believe his name is. He is rather soft-spoken. He's kind of meek. And it seems he's trying to focus on something else after some unexplained incident. He was brought on to replace Teddy. Good for him, I guess. Well, for however way you want to define this work position being good. He seems nice. And that's what makes me the most cautious, because he clearly has a history, and that history brought him to the OIAR. But he is our audience surrogate, and he is going to be the point of view that we experience this show. Because there's very clearly so much that needs to be learned. Because there are new rules, clearly. And it just leads me to wonder how much of the rules are the same, how much of the rules are different. And Sam is going to be the vehicle through which we learn these things. Next up, we have Alice Dyer, who is the amicable ex of Sam. Apparently a longtime employee of the OIAR, apparently recommended him, and is the reason he got this job in the first place. She's nice. She's cute. She's funny. She's a bit of a cheeky prankster. But if she is anything like the Tim from Magnus Archives, then I can't help but worry what exactly she's being happy to mask, you know? Sometimes the cheeriest characters have the greatest burden, or whatever that saying goes. So I don't want to say that I'm looking forward to seeing what's behind the happy mask that Alice wears, but I do think she is wearing one, and I do think that at a certain point in time, it's going to come off. And I just really sincerely hope that it's not the same kind of mask. I hope that it's not the same underlying issues that haunted Tim in Magnus Archives. Next, we have Gwen Bouchard, the longtime employee of the OIAR, hoping to climb the ladder and take over as director. She has a no-nonsense attitude. I respect that. She prefers to be thorough in her assessments, and because of that, she is behind in her work. And she butts heads with Alice for the lack of work ethic, but hey, maybe that's just the nature of having a jokey character paired with a serious character. But she also butts heads with the equally serious Lena, the current director of the OIAR. Regarding Gwen, one thing that I think a lot of people have kind of sort of latched onto and are equally worried about and wondering about is the fact that Gwen's last name is Bouchard. Now, this is important because the Magnus Archives also has a character by the name of Bouchard. His name is Elias Bouchard, and he is the head of the Magnus Institute. From start to finish, Elias is the head of the Magnus Institute. And Elias was a character. I will try not to spoil too much with regards to his role in that story, but Elias is a character who takes a lot of actions, but he also takes a lot of inactions, and those inactions have a lot more consequences in the world of Magnus Archives. So, Gwen here shares a last name with him, and I can't help but be just the eensy teensy tiny little bit concerned about where her character arc could lead her. I don't think that she is a similar position as Elias. Elias had a very unique position that is not even like dependent on him being the head of the Magnus Institute. Rather, his position was occupied by many other people before him, let's just say. Gwen, I don't think, has that problem, but she does have a similar drive and ambition. Elias had a background of being from a well-to-do family, and just wanting to prove that he deserved it. And I wonder if Gwen is in a similar position, but time will reveal all. We'll just have to wait and see. Moving on to Lena, the director of the OIAR, she is weird. She's no nonsense, much more so than Gwen, but she's in a position of power, and she is in a position to keep and withhold secrets. And she's not willing to share them. Makes sense. It's a government job, need to know basis, classified information, comes with the territory. It makes sense that she would keep secrets. But this is a horror podcast. This is the Magnus Protocol. This is in the universe of the Magnus Archives. Secrets are this isn't just going to be like a case of just like, oh, she's secretly in an affair with a married woman. Like, that's probably not the big secret she's sitting on. Pile of secrets that she's sitting on. Lena probably knows exactly what the system is for. She's never going to tell us until we get to a point where she has to or she can. And I think she is of the personality who will make sure that that can tell us and that should tell us opportunity is as far and away from the audience, from her underlings as possible. Who knows? Maybe Gwen will actually indeed move up the corporate ladder. Corporate ladder? I guess corporate ladder. And be in a position to see the whatever ugly truth that Lena and her men in black are hiding behind them. Although it really has just been those in the office that we have seen the perspective of. But that could very easily change. Colin, the IT manager of OIAR. The dude is always mad. Dude's got a hair-trigger temper, and he's paranoid. And unfortunately for people who in the Magnus Archives world, paranoia isn't good. Paranoia isn't good. And the thing about Colin that scares me the most is that the dude is really paranoid. He very clearly knows that they're being listened to. He knows that the phones are being tapped into. He knows the cameras are being tapped into, and he's acting accordingly. The problem is, he gives off the vibe of the character who is going to know, right? He gives off the vibe of a character that is going to know what is happening, what's going on, and the big secrets, or at least an inkling of this truth. And I feel like whatever he's going to learn or know is going to be enough that we're going to end up not having Colin. I can't help but get the sneaking suspicion that if, common tropes are to be believed, which they don't always have to be, tropes are tools after all, I can't help but feel like Colin I feel like he's got a timer on him. Everyone else, I don't get the vibe that we're going to lose them as time goes on. I could very well be surprised, but I fully expect Colin to drop out of the following long before the season finale. Long before the series finale, I should say. I'm scared for him. But he has this charming Scottish accent. Because of that, I can't help but root for him and hope that he stays here for as long a time as possible. Please don't let him die in the first season. He's a very interesting character, I think. And then, of course, there's Freddy. What the heck is Freddy? Apparently, it is a 1989 algorithm program that the division uses to find all instances of supernatural incidents as recorded on all manner of technological devices, including, but not limited to, emails, phone calls, and transcribed print sources. Forums. Just what the heck, right? It feels weird, first of all, that this is just a job where you can apply and work for. It feels like this isn't the kind of job that you can discuss out in the open, right? I mean, obviously, there's probably like some NDAs and like security measures, and like they would probably, an employee would probably get bonked hard on the head for taking on this job and literally, although not at will, being given access to private accounts and private like documents and whatnot, and just being able to like read it. The fact that like the government in this instance is given access to this with seemingly no repercussions whatsoever seems wild to me. And it's a job that you can just apply to and walk away from. Need I remind you, Teddy literally leaves. His first episode in the series is leaving what feels like it should be a highly secretive government institution. And yet he just goes. No, probably all the paperwork is taken care of and done. And yet he's just gone. There's no real like worry or concern about it. And no one is like talking about it. And yet, despite the high level of like access to the internet, all they are given to work with are a series of 90s era PCs and Windows NT, the predecessor of Windows, 94? It's like, what is going on, right? Why does the government have this office? Unless it's not even like an office or department of the government in the first place. But that's me jumping the gun. Apparently, that they have to file taxes, right? They get a pension. They get a high pay. They get good pay for menial labor. And in all likelihood, it's probably in a building marked with government like insignias. Likely. Here I'm kind of sort of jumping the gun here, but like it's highly unlikely that they would be working a government job that is so easy to get in and easy to walk away from. I don't know, with it being like a front for something else. Although who knows, maybe it is a front for something else, just not in the sense of what you'd expect. But yeah, that's just one of the things that makes Freddy just seem a little scary, right? Just a little bit scary. But the one other thing about Freddy that is kind of sort of interesting is the specific voices they decided to have read out and dictate the incidents. For Norris, it is Alex. I forgot it. I don't know why I didn't write his full name. Let me see here. Where is it? Alex. Well, all you need to know is Alex also voices Martin from Magnus Archives. The voice for Chester is Johnny from the Magnus Archives. And then Augustus is voiced by someone named Tim Fearon, who I don't recognize and was not able to find anything as for any previous work in the Magnus Archives. But Norris and Chester, aka Martin and John, that's big. That's important. So, Martin is another character. I would go so far as to say like another protagonist in the story of the Magnus Archives, because as the story proceeds and as the story goes on, things get weird. It starts to expand. We start to meet the other members of the staff. We start to meet other people outside in the grand world of the Magnus Archives. And at a certain point, the world goes to hell in a handbasket. It becomes irreparably unchanged. It becomes irreparably changed. And time and space get messed with. There are horrors wandering about, and the world is just bleak and grimdark. And it feels like as that season progresses that there will be no fixing it, and the best possible course of action is to just shuffle everyone off to a realm of death and doom and despair, and eventually starve out everything out there. That way the world can end not with a scream of horror, but a soft, slowly diminishing whimper. At least that is one of the possibilities they explore. There is another possibility that they explore, which is to basically fling the horrors that haunt that world into, well, I'll just tell you right now, spoilers, I guess, for the series finale, but the one other solution that they come up for is to toss out all the horrors that haunt the world into a new reality. Yeah, they play around with multiverses in this series. Well, they don't play around with it. They don't mess around with it too much, but the Magnus Protocol seems to suggest that that is exactly what they're trying to do here, at least in the instance of what's going on in this universe. Thing is, when that happened, when they flung the horrors away, tossed them aside from their reality into whether one other reality or a myriad of other realities, Martin and John disappear. Both of them disappear from that world, and notably, everyone questions where they could be, but they note that no one ever found a body. There were other people like Martin, like John, who were touched with the powers of the horrific things, right? In this point in time, I'll go ahead and name them. They're called the entities. It's an open secret. I don't know why I'm like dancing around this subject when literally when you talk about the Magnus Archives, you're bound to come across a conversation about the entities. The entities are essentially fear, not given form, but they are fear itself. In the world of Magnus Archives, when you say there's nothing to fear but fear itself is terrifying. It is terrifying because it can actually think, and it actually acts actively against you in that world. But it also plays favorites, and its favorites do its bidding, whether willingly or not, and as a result, they get fed fear. They feed off of it, especially fear that is in line with a specific kind. There is a lot of them, right? But for the most part, we'll just stick to the big 12, which is the eye, the web, the desolation, the buried, the vast. There's several other, the dark, the hunt, the slaughter. It's a whole thing. And then Martin and John are touched, and I guess if you want to say blessed or cursed with the powers of some of those entities. And when those entities went away, they took their powers with them, leaving their so-called avatars behind. But again, John and Martin were never found. They weren't left behind, seems to be the implication. And yet here they are. Here's their voices in a government office that is doing something very, very concerning. But we'll get to that as we go along. I just find it very, very interesting that their voices would be used here. Why would they use different voices? Why would they use a separate cast for something such as the Magnus Protocol, but use the same voices in this exact instance? Especially when it serves exactly the kind of work that they did, John reading statements. Martin also, at a certain point, took up John's job and started reading statements as well. They're doing the exact same thing that they did before, except as a digitized program in a government office that seems to have a wide, unrestricted access to literally every piece of technology in existence. At least English-speaking wise. And especially in a world that is taken the route of multiverse travel. It's a curious thing indeed, and probably, very much likely, not an accident, and definitely not because they couldn't find another voice actor. Highly doubt that's the case, but we'll get to that. But yeah, that's most of the characters, that's most of them at this point in time, and like I said, Teddy kind of sort of establishes... Oh wait, no, I didn't talk about this. Ooh. Yeah. So a lot of, like I said, a lot of rules have been broken with this first episode. And like looking at all the characters, I'm wondering about Freddy, I'm wondering about Norris and Chester and what the heck is going on. But one of the other things that comes up that's very important to discuss is just the office itself. The office itself is underfunded, clearly. Not getting a lot of support, but it at the same time is given unrestricted access to the internet. It made me wonder if it is serving a similar purpose as the Magnus Institute did in the original series. Except for one eensy teensy tiny little thing, and that eensy teensy tiny little thing is Teddy, the guy who leaves the office. Like, yeah, sure, I lost my mind about the fact that it's just like, oh, why does this government office that is kind of sort of spying on everyone, letting someone just like walk away as simple as that? But what's more important is that he just leaves the department. He just leaves the department. Which means it's not like the Magnus Institute, because one of the key factors about the Magnus Institute is that once you're on board, you can't leave. Well, specifically, if you're a member of the archiving team, then you can't just leave. Because the thing about the Institute is that it served as a stronghold for one of the entities, or at least one of its avatars, essentially, utilized the Institute as a stronghold. And that entity is known as the Eye of Beholding. It knows you. It is more or less the fear of knowledge. It's the fear of someone knowing your secrets. It is paranoia. It is the fear of seeking out knowledge, even despite knowing that that knowledge will be your undoing. And in that world, once you join the archival team and you stop like looking for knowledge in the name of the Eye, then you start to waste away. You start to wither. You start to die, because at that point in time, you are fed on the exact same fear as the entity itself. Tim tries to do that. Several characters try to leave the archiving team, but it's not something that you can just do. And they end up suffering for it. However, in this case, that's exactly what happens. Teddy just leaves the OIAR. And that just leads me to assume that the office isn't, weirdly enough, it's not a stronghold for the Eye. It doesn't seem to be a stronghold for the Eye. And I guess in some regards, maybe that's... Looking at it now, it doesn't seem so bewildering. now that I've calmed down and looked at it, quote unquote, objectively, it kind of makes sense. They're not exactly like extracting the fear. One of the things that happens in Magnus is that, well, okay, from now on, we're gonna differentiate between the series as archives and protocol. All right, with that out of the way, in archives, they would interview people. People would come in, give their statement, talk about the spooky, scary thing that they experienced. And then they would record it. And in having people tell their story, tell them what happened, they would basically be feeding the eye because they're remembering that fear. And one of the other fears that the eye feeds on is the fear that someone is watching you suffer and not doing anything about it. So that's that case as well. And that's not what's happening in the office. So the question is the Office of Incident Assessment and Response a stronghold for an entity, specifically the eye? It doesn't seem like it. It doesn't seem like it. They're not taking statements. They're just randomly plucking incidents from the internet and collecting it. Literally just assessing it. But then where's the response part of the office coming from? At some point, Alice says that she thinks that a response division existed, but she thinks it got, like, cut from, like, the budget or whatever, and it doesn't exist anymore. But, I mean, it's a horror podcast. Odds are it probably still exists, just maybe not in official capacity, but then why wouldn't it exist in an official capacity? Important questions. There's just so much, right, going on in the first episode alone. And it's just, I remember wasting away in my seat trying, because I was listening to the first episode on my train ride to Tokyo. Or was it the other way around? Hardly matters. Point is, I was just like, I need my notebook because there's just so much going on here. I'm like going through my notes right now. They get more organized in the later episodes, I promise. But right now, I thought I organized it. It's still very much a mess. It's still very much a mess. Maybe it might help that I look at the episode, my actual analysis notes. But, okay. If the OIAR is not a stronghold of the eye, then for what purpose are they, like, looking up for these incidents? Where does Freddy come in? Who made Freddy? What purpose is it supposed to serve? And why is it suddenly? Because you can't tell me that it's not doing this, that it itself is not doing this. Why is it now listening in on the office happenings? Why? Why is it listening to them now, of all times? Why is it spying on them? And why isn't the digital medium... Why is the digital medium working? Because like I said, in archives, the digital medium was not optional, was not a thing that they could use because for some reasons that were unknown, even after the series has ended, it's still kind of sort of like, why specifically is tape to be used? But like digital medium was just not used because it would keep messing up during recording. In some regards, it can be dismissed because one of the entities kind of sort of needed this information to be on magnetic tape instead. But it's weird because it clearly works here, leading me to wonder if it just doesn't... that's just the rules of this universe. But then, in the incident report regarding the forum of Red Canary going into the ruins of the Magnus Institute, it doesn't work. They try taking a picture of stuff around there and they try to upload it to the forum, but it doesn't work. Up until the end, when someone does eventually post it. Even at that point, there's no guarantee that it wasn't using the single lens camera. or the SLR instead of a digital SLR. Because the SLR camera is using like the normal, just a regular camera, right? A single lens, a mirror reflecting what shows up and then putting that onto film, as opposed to a digital medium. So it clearly worked there, maybe? That's me assuming, right? That's me assuming that they eventually got pictures, but they used the single lens instead of the digital. No way to guarantee, especially since A, this is a purely audio medium, and B, the image would have been deleted if there was a video anyways. But that's that situation. That's what's going on. It's hard to say who's in charge. Could it be the eye? Maybe. It feels like it should be a stronghold of the eye, but it's not feeding on fear. I mean, it's collecting it, sure, and it's compiling it. That all screams eye. All right, the eye is desire for knowledge. That just makes sense. But it's not collecting the fear. And it's the people working here aren't feeding into it or like showing exactly a grim fascination with it, with the sole exception of maybe Sam. Sam might be the only exception just because he seems to be taking a very vested interest in what shows up on the screen, but Gwen maybe could also be a case, but it seems more like a situation of being professional and thorough in her work. Alice is deeply uninterested, sure. Lena, hard to say. Colin seems to be super paranoid, which could possibly feed into the eye, but it really just doesn't seem like the eye is in charge here at this point. Could it be the web? The web being an entity that rules the fear of control, of unforeseen consequences. It would be possible. It wouldn't be the first time the web has done its job using a medium that seems to reflect eye powers, but there's nothing to really give that sort of like indication. Although maybe you could be tongue-in-cheek and be all like, since it's accessing the World Wide Web, then the web must be involved. There's not enough. It's the first episode, so it's really hard to say what is going on. Which means that for the time being, we're kind of just gonna have to use the incidents themselves as a way of measuring what the heck is going on. And so that's exactly what we're going to do. And of course, we'll look at like the office interactions and try to deduce what the hell is going on that front. But we're going to be mostly dependent on the incidents, and we're going to try to piece together what's going on there, right? The first incident, well, I mean, two incidents were premiered with this first episode. The first incident, the second. First incident really kind of shows just how odd the filing system is, doesn't it? That's the incident with the reanimation stuff, the zombie aspect, right? I have to say, it is quite interesting. It is quite appropriate and fitting that the first episode that they should show and the first incident that should be assessed would have very strong aspects of what was called the Stranger in Archives. The Stranger in Archives is an entity that represents the fear of the unknown. It is the fear of the uncanny valley, you know? When you see something that seems like vaguely human, but it's just ever so slightly off. Like if you saw a mannequin moving, if you saw dolls, if you saw a corpse moving, that would be the strange. And in this case, I can't help but say that it's very strongly represented here. It's also represented in the first episode of Archives, which I think is much more easier to see, and that could be said in this regard as well. In this situation, Harriet appears to have been like in contact with psychics and mediums to try and get into contact with a lost lover, a lost family member, one or the other. Arthur seems to have passed away, and at some point, someone contacts Harriet about being able to speak to Arthur again. So she or they go to a graveyard, and they encounter what they describe as a vaguely human shape, right? I feel it could have other aspects. There's the fear of death, which is the end, is there as well. There's the fear of the dark, which is appropriately called the dark as well. But very strongly, the stranger is represented. Now, this could be written off as just a nice little narrative bookend reference, a nice narrative exposition, but it kind of sort of highlights the differences between John's first recording as an archivist and Sam's work as a civil servant. John just had to sort of like take it, read it, and then talk about what they like learned from it, whereas Sam is expected to just take it, assess it, basically repeat what's in there, and then just throw it into the system and never have to think about it again. The question is, what is at work here, right? The fears seem to be working in the exact same capacity that they always have, which is to go around, scare the ever-living bejeebus out of someone, feed on that fear, and then go off and do whatever they want. Of course, there is a survivor bias. Not everyone survives an encounter with them, and some of them do end up getting swallowed up and disappearing forever with no one to know what the heck happens to them. But the question is, to what end now? To what end would they be doing something like this? Why would a stranger, once again, be haunting someone with the face of their lost love? Well, maybe not even their face, but with their voice. Seems to suggest that, once again, they're trying to get into the world. Because one of the key points of archives is that the entities are trying to break out of this weird sort of like parallel reality and break into the material reality. They do this through rituals of sorts. This is something that they spend centuries trying to do within the universe of archives, which is have their avatars gather as much of their signature fear as possible in order to get into the material reality. With the avatars all kind of sort of like under the impression that they are trying to get their entity out into the world first, because if someone else does it, then they quote unquote lose, I guess, and will be able to feed on the fear that they need. And it was believed that if the entities were shoved off into a different reality, that they would basically end up in the same way that they started out, which is just on the edges of consciousness, of the collective consciousness of humanity, trying once again to break through that barrier and break into the world again. So is that what they're trying to do? Odds are, probably. But the question is are they following the exact same rules, or are they given a new set of rules just by virtue of being in a new reality? Or is there a consequence of them having been shoved off to a new reality that no one really thought to consider? Which is the fact that they know they can be shoved off into a new reality. Because there is a very, very specific method that happened. And there is a very, very real possibility that just by experiencing it, maybe they understand that it can happen. Hard to say, but one thing is for certain is that some things just kind of sort of stay the same, even if they are different. So first off, we have, from that point on, we have the second incident report that occurs in this episode, which involves the titular Magnus Institute. Why? First of all, there's a lot about the Institute's like presence here in this universe that makes it stand out far more from its original incarnation in archives. The fact that it's on an urban exploration shows demonstrates that it doesn't exist. I think it was also heavily advertised that this series would be taking place in a universe where the Institute burned down. Rather interestingly, the Institute here was in Manchester, whereas in the original series it was in Chelsea, London. So this places it about 150 miles northwest from its original placement in archives. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean too much. Even in the original series, it was moved, I think, once or twice. No, probably twice. No, once. It was moved once from, I think, Gloucester? Probably. I don't remember. It definitely got moved to Chelsea, London. But the reasons why is not important. So in this world, it seems that it was burned down. The fact that it existed in the first place makes me question a couple of things. So, something that happened in archives is that there was this one character, I believe her name was Anya. I forget which episode it was, but Anya, at one point, ended up at the Magnus Institute. Oh, wait, no, I have it written down here. Ooh. Okay, here it is. The episode was episode 114, Cracked Foundations. It was the first suggestion of the series finale, though no one could have possibly have guessed that it would be like the game changer, I think. In which the statement giver mentions that they had never even heard of the Magnus archives because the Institute was a different building for them, that they had emerged from this place known as Hilltop Road and realized that a lot of people that they knew no longer recognized them, that the date was several days before they had gone into that house in the first place. It leads me to question some things, because that person ended up being the hint that multiverses was a possibility in this series. That person went on to say that they met people that they knew and found out that there are people that no longer existed for them. So if the Institute exists in this world, sure, it might be in a different location. The next question is, do other characters exist in this world as well? Is there, for example, another Gertrude Robinson? Gertrude Robinson being the predecessor to John as archivist at the Magnus Institute. Is there going to be a just other things going on? Are there certain events that happen in this universe that are parallel, that run parallel to archives? In archives, Gertrude tried to burn down the Institute, but she failed and died trying. Is this a universe where she succeeded? There is also another episode where another woman by the name of Rosa Meyer, who stars in Magnus episode... I didn't write it down. Well, Magnus in another Magnus episode known as, I think, The Observer Effect. Rosa Meyer was haunted by some creature that seemed to watch her, and when she gave her statement, she felt like it was strongest there. And she was later arrested for murdering a delivery driver, and their cargo was full of stationery that usually always goes to the Magnus Institute. Like, is this a universe where she succeeded in burning down the Magnus Institute? It's hard to say. Is it an instance of the Institute being attacked by another entity? Hard to say. Is this like an instance where the worm succeeded or the desolation succeeded? It's hard to say right now, but I'm sure that we are going to get answers for that sooner rather than later. The only thing that really that throws me for a little bit of a loop is that when Red Canary discusses saying a bunch of like runes and symbols, that's new. That feels new with regards to Magnus, just because I don't know, it feels like that's never really factored into things like symbols and runes as being necessary for a given ritual or act of the entities. It feels kind of sort of foreign. So does that suggest that the rules are different, or have runes just always been a part of rituals and John just never really focused on that, or no one really focused on that? I don't know. And something else that bothers me, that really strikes me as quite odd. Why has Freddy not clocked in on the Magnus Institute? I don't understand how it couldn't possibly be flagged by Freddy, because Gwen claims she has heard nothing of the Magnus Institute. She's never heard of it before. But the Institute itself, traditionally, I guess, has always been focused on the supernatural and collecting information on the supernatural. Not everything was relegated to, magnetic tape. Not everything was relegated to tape recorders. And if someone experienced something weird, they probably would have talked about it. And then eventually someone would have mentioned going to the Institute to give a statement. So does that mean Freddy is just ignoring the Institute? Do they really not put stuff digitally? Or were they just not? This part I'm highly doubtful about, but surely they were also taking statements and paranormal spooky stuff to begin with. Were they just doing things just ever so slightly different? Odds are, though, that it probably is still a stronghold of the eye, as demonstrated by what I assume to be the untimely end of Red Canary. It would not be the first time that someone was cut open and eyes were discovered to be hidden amongst their viscera. It's not the first time. I'm assuming that was what the picture on the forum was about. Otherwise, why have gore and why delete the image? And I guess the eyes was probably kind of sort of horrific in and of itself, but still, something is at the Institute. There's very clearly something at the Institute, and it is very clearly much more hostile, actually. Normally, the eye is not so hands-on. I have to say, normally it's been very, standoffish. It's been about watching and waiting and learning and knowing. It's never been so dangerous, I want to say. I mean, yeah, any avatar of the eye is capable of doing some pretty horrific things, but none of them can really hurt you. Except apparently in this instance. Someone has just straight up died. So I have to wonder if it's really... I just have to wonder if there's something there. And the odds are fairly good that there is something there. The question is what and or who? Could it be John and Martin? I kind of sort of highly doubt it, just by virtue of their quote-unquote presence with Freddy. But I really genuinely can't believe that it's... I couldn't begin to guess what could possibly be there, because it doesn't feel like an avatar of the eye when they're usually so passive. Why are they being so active in this case? What is it trying to do? Hard to say. It really is hard to say. But with that having been said, how could I forget? Next up, why does Sam gets super curious about the Institute as well. He says that he's calling it a blast from the past, but he says it like it's something that anyone would be familiar with. Yet Gwen doesn't recognize the name at all. Its stuff doesn't show up in the system, apparently, even though it feels like something with such a wealth of knowledge, supernatural knowledge, historically, should show up in something like a government computer that is designed to tap into private information like emails. I don't know. But that's where we're at with episode 1, Magnus Protocol. It's so exciting for me. It is so interesting for me because here I am just having a metric ton of questions about what's going on, what's going to happen, what are the rules, where is this series going to go? Johnny Sims, I have to know. And I hope it's piqued some of your guys' interest as well. Right off the back, I can't really say that I have any particular favorites amongst the cast, at least in terms of just like character-wise, although Sam is rather endearing. Alice as well, I do like her chipper nature. Gwen's no-nonsense attitude, I don't know, I'm scared. I'm scared about her. I like Colin. I don't think we're gonna have Colin for much longer. And Lena scares me. Lena really scares me. Yeah. And then, of course, Freddy. Freddy. What on earth are you trying to do, buddy? What are you plotting? What are you planning on doing? What is the purpose to spy on these people? Because the purpose that reason why tape recorders started showing up randomly in archives was explicitly for the purposes of the series finale. Because having those tapes all over the place ultimately served the needs of the person orchestrating the series finale in the first place. But what is the end goal here? What is the goal here? Is it for posterity purposes? Highly doubt it. One of the things that made the ending for Magnus Archives so good was the implications and the reasoning that explained why the tape recorders were everywhere. But now my question is, why is Freddy doing this? Why is it tapping into everything? Why is it accessing every piece of technology just to listen in on a bit of office politics? What's the end goal here? Is the end goal the same as it was in the series finale of flinging the entities into another dimension? Or is that not what's going? Is that not the position of the person behind Freddy right now? I highly suspect that flinging the entities into another reality is still at work. I think that plan is in motion as the series progresses. I have no doubt in believing that. My question is that goal the goal of whoever is behind Freddy? And I can't help but wonder about that. Because if they're using the digital medium, then that runs counter to the reasoning behind using the tape recorders from the original series. Because it's all data, right? It's all on a database. And I don't think throwing a server is going to have the exact same effect as the net that they created with the magnetic tape. What are you planning? What are you trying to do? Not questions that can be answered after one episode, now are they? Luckily, we're going to be talking about the Magnus Protocol all week. Yeah, if you guys have paid attention to my schedule, I am going to be talking about the Magnus Protocol basically every day. Wednesdays are a break, and Fridays are creative workshops. But we're going to be talking about it until I have caught you guys up on the series and my hypotheses, excuse me. And once we get to the point where we've caught up with the series, these episodes will be a weekly thing. They'll also be something that, at a certain point, once I return back to the States, they're going to be a weekly upload, and I won't be able to stream them as much, if at all. So that's something to look forward to. But for now, at this point in time, we're just going to be focusing mostly on like breaking down the series and what happens in each episode. But I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it. I hope you guys are looking forward to it as well. I have pages of stuff that I've written down, and like, if only I had a cork board and some red string and maybe a printer, I guess. This would, oh man, this would be I don't know how to describe the amount of overthinking that I have put my brain power towards. It's actually kind of sort of exhausting. But on that note, I think it would be good of me to go ahead and take a break from it, right? And go ahead and basically call it an evening. Thank you guys so much for popping in, hanging out, being you beautiful selves. I had a fantastic time talking about the Magnus Protocol. I hope you guys are okay with leaving me in the background to yap about it for the next couple of days. But that's where we're gonna leave this episode. It was, I feel like I rambled. I promise you guys that the subsequent episodes are far more organized. And I just should have gone back and organized my earlier notes, but what can I say? I'm lazy like that. But thank you guys once again. I had fun. I hope you guys had a good time as well. And I will see you guys tomorrow. That being said, shops closed. Get out. Bye bye, guys. See you tomorrow.